Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of At War, the podcast by the Conflict Law Center. Today, we are very happy to have with us Dr. Furrukh Khan, who is an associate professor at LUMS, and he has been teaching there since 2001. He has a PhD in post-colonial studies from the University of Kent, where he taught for 2 years before returning to LUMS. His research interests include the partition of India, post-colonial literature, Shakespeare, and oral history. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for inviting. And
no problem.
Very happy to be here.
I'm glad. So today we're going to be talking about quite a diverse topic, which is culture and its relationship to conflict. And I wanted to talk to you a bit more generally, because locate this in South Asia. So we know that art throughout all cultures, throughout all ages, has been used to promote, oppress, and recover from war. So perhaps the biggest legacy of violence we have here in the subcontinent is partition. And that has been the subject of much literature, theatre, and film. So how do you think India and Pakistan have used the arts to recover, and I think perhaps recover is the wrong word, from the brutality that we saw during partition?
Thank you. And again, I think one of the things that we need to understand first is that there are various narratives which exist about different events. And for us, people in Pakistan, one of the things that we have to see that even within the state narrative, we don't really know. I mean, that's something that I ask students, because I've been teaching a course on partition for over 20 years at LUMS, which is that what is it that 14th August represents? Is it independence or is it partition?
Okay.
So, and these are two different things, even though they happen simultaneously. The state talks about independence in the sense that that's when the British imperialism kind of ends. But what it articulates is partition in terms of the violence, and that's where we kind of starting. The conflict is not with the British, who are departing, who had occupied and colonized South Asia for such a long time, but the narrative which emerges from the state's side is about partition. So there is this almost kind of fundamental difference, or again, almost kind of slippage from one event to the other. We are saying that we are celebrating independence, but if you're saying if you're celebrating independence, and independence has to be from the British, then narrative is about partition. So we don't say that on 14th August we are celebrating or we are talking about partition. We don't say that. Okay, so there is this kind of dichotomy that exists. On the other hand, as I said, that then what the state does is not just for Pakistan, for India, for any other state. The idea of nation, the idea of narration, the idea of narrative, all these things are almost kind of interlinked. Nation emerges from narrative. Narrative is what? It's the story of how a nation is formed. As far as, again, partition is concerned, there is a particular narrative that India and Pakistan, the states, kind of come up with. And usme, one of the terms I use for that is using this French post-structuralist Deleuze and Guattari's model, which is that there are certain things which are linear. The state believes in linearity. It says that, okay, fine, in 1857 this event happened. Then in 88 another event happened. Then on this April 14th, 1940, this event happened. So there is a huge gap between these numbers. But then what happens is that at the end of the day, you have this straight line. As if that these are somehow sequential order in which things kind of follow. So, and this is a rather simplistic narrative, not just about partition, but about any event. I mean, if you talk about the US, they have a particular narrative. If you talk about Britain, they are kind of, they have the longing for the nostalgia for the Raj and Fulana and Ye and all that stuff, but which basically was a colonial project which was about dehumanization and about violence on people who were not of European origin. So that's what colonialism was about. Again, on the other hand, the question that you kind of started off with was that there are arts, there is, and again, arts takes many forms. I mean, there are creative efforts, it could be literature, and again, the thing is, there are people who come up with kind of almost instinctual response to this. That could be Amarta Pritam's poetry, Hun Akha Varis Shahnu, that's in Punjabi. Because again, the thing is, as far as partition is concerned, the most effect that it has on South Asia is on the Punjab. Because this is where you have the transfer, forced transfer of people, forced migration, not transfer, migration of people from one side to the other. And by some estimates, again, we don't have an exact figure, 14 million people are supposed to have moved from one side to the other. And by many accounts, that's the largest migration in the human history over such a short span of time. After that, what happens is that there is this almost kind of stunned silence, that people who are creative writers, they are not really able to come up with the responses, because you don't really know. Something like happened with the Holocaust, that how could you kind of conceptualize the scale of what it is that had happened. But then later on, you have almost kind of 5-10 years pass, and Manto's stories are collected. There are other people who are writing, and it then takes a little while more, a kind of, not a strategic distance, but there is some emotional distance which is established, and then you have almost this third round of efforts. जिसमें खामोश पानी, Sabiha Sumar's film, which I think it's one of the best films on partition that comes out. You have people like Gujral Sahab from India. He paints these beautiful pictures, beautiful as in very moving pictures. You have Jimmy Engineer in Pakistan, who kind of looks at this huge landscape of what it is that's happening. So this is like almost like third attempt. The fourth attempt, which is happening, is kind of using material things. Anchal Malhotra has written on this. So this is the second, or almost like the third generation, trying to recover the narratives of partition. So, Anchal Malhotra talks about, for people who use, for cloth cutting, you have this scale. I don't really know what one would call it, but it's like a long piece of rod which has like numbers encrypted on it, and then it'll say, okay, now this is 2 feet. When you're cutting cloth, when you go to a market, they use that. Usko Urdu mein gaz kehte hain. Okay, so a family which brought that, there is a story how that kind of inanimate object in itself, yet it has a story.
Okay. That's very interesting.
So there are a number of people who are now talking, representing partition, representing the almost kind of, Aparna Kaur is someone, I think, like she's done a work on the paintings. So you have what is almost kind of literal weight or a metaphorical weight of partition on your back. So you have people kind of going with things which they might have had on their shoulder, on their back, but that's not just a literal representation. That's a metaphorical representation of almost intergenerational trauma that is carried. So I mean, what is it that this thing does? A different medium, almost soft medium of representing what it is that as an individual, as a community, as a country, people have gone through. So I mean, as I said, state's narrative, you have to kind of either take it or leave it.
Yeah. It's interesting for me to hear about it like this because I think I didn't grow up here, but I learned about British India and the partition at school, and then it was reading Manto's stories which really hit it home to me how colossal. And I read Mottled Dawn, and I was just like, oh my god, it was my first interaction with the kind of cultural representation of that. And I always, the distinction that you're making between the state and the non-state for me is very interesting when we look at it in terms of Bangladesh, because there you had this state narrative, which was that, okay, these are no longer the brothers that we told you these people were. They're very Hindu-like. They look very different from us. They don't speak our language. They're very different from us. So that kind of dehumanization
the sense of
happened.
otherization
The
takes
otherization
place.
takes place.
So that took place during colonialism, the British and the non-British. Then it takes place during India whenever there is conflict. So, okay, fine, you are Muslim League and you are Congress. Then it takes, you are Muslim and I am Hindu and, someone else is a Sikh. Then it takes place, these are rural communities, these are urban settings. So again, that otherization, it never really stops. So one would have imagined, again, the narrative when one is kind of and Fanon talks about this, that when you're aspiring towards an independence from colonization, you think that, okay, fine, once these people go, everything will be honky-dory. It doesn't work out like that. So, in that, for example, Muslim League ka, and again, I think Denise Kandioti talks about this, that you have, for example, it was said that, these Muslims are regressive and they, they kind of, again, the typical narrative that you have now, they oppress their women and this and that and all that stuff. So what the Muslim League did was that they made a deliberate effort. They said, our women should come out and they should be in the public and all that. So once independence is attained, not just in Pakistan, but in other places, what you have is then the patriarchal control tries to exert itself. It says, okay, fine, now, you've done this, but now I think maybe let's go back to traditional roots. Traditional roles that might have, and that happened in Britain. So women were involved in jobs and so many other things because men were on the war front. But once these people come back, then they want the restoration of traditional orders. And if you try to resist that, then you say, oh no, you're too modern, or you are not kind of patriotic enough. The national project is more important. Why are you worried about women? And so all again, what one is saying is that these aren't necessarily debates which are peculiar to Pakistan. They take place in most of these post-colonial
because you had that picture of that Rosie the Riveter, what is she doing for the war effort in the UK, and then the minute these men came back, they were like, we want our jobs back, and the women were like, no, we're so used to financial security now and independence.
So then it said, oh, modesty ka hoga, nahi, these are too modern, these are too westernized, or maybe you don't want to kind of follow our cultural norms, and then you bring in a religion, then you bring in a family. So there are all these things which are there to use to kind of put the genie back, but the thing is that becomes a problem. So again, not just in Pakistan, this is something which is replicated in a number of other places. But again, the thing is that these various perspectives, what it does is that it adds complexity to understanding a complex problem.
And to what extent do you think that that's changed going forward? Because I feel like it used to be the literary or cultural elite which were able to tell these stories, and now you've kind of had that change a little bit given social media, given a kind of democratization of producing content. Anyone who has an iPhone now can produce something on their phones, and that's why TikTok has taken off so much, because you have a Balochi brick kiln worker who is now making money off TikTok. And so to what extent do you think that has changed the ability of the state to create a narrative and push it on people?
I think that's an important question, and I think in number of cases, the established creators of narrative are not necessarily aware of the power that these new mediums have.
Oh, really? Okay.
the state, for example, I mean, if you say, as you mentioned, someone from a village in, far-flung village in Balochistan would have, I don't know, 500,000 or, 100,000 or, some astronomical number of people who are following him or her. On the other hand, you wouldn't necessarily have similar version. One is not saying that the state can use, but the thing, again, why is it that I, sitting in Balochistan, can use a TikTok and have my message so many people? Why is it not that Islamabad, yeah, Lahore, yeah, other people who take themselves too seriously?
Yeah.
So in the sense, what has happened is that, again, this almost revolution in communication that has taken place. As I said, like, again, the established creators of narratives are not aware of these things. They lack the expertise. You look around and so ask, government of Pakistan, ask government of Punjab, who are your social media experts? Who, and again, the thing is, me saying that, okay, fine, I've studied social media at Oxford or Cambridge or King's College or LUMS or koi aur, but and how many people are following me?
Yeah.
On the other hand, I say, no, I'm from Shakargarh because that's where my village is. And, there are people, as I said, like, again, they have literally millions of people who are their followers. So that means that there is catching up that the state needs to be engaged in, but more often than not, they are not engaged in that.
So I knew someone who was working in development, and they were looking at all of the Twitter accounts that people follow, and the state wanted to get across the message, and it was something very, non-offensive to everyone, but they were like, who is the least offensive character that we can pull in, personality that we can pull in to send this message? And they made a list of all of the Pakistanis that it could be. They found out it was Shahid Afridi, because he's the one who is the least offensive to the mullahs, everybody across the spectrum.
Then they try to play safe. Again, these are things that this is what the social media does, that I can be not necessarily offensive, but I can be thought-provoking. Okay?
Yeah.
But then the thing is, if you're looking at it, again, this is the whole thing, that the state and, again, these stuffy people, including people like myself.
I think I'm very stuffy as well.
So they are not aware, because the thing is, they are not kind of self-assessing the ability, because like I would think, when I've done a PhD and I've come from abroad and this and that, and I know about these things.
Yeah.
And this guy, look at him, I mean, he's running a food show in the village, and
But my issue with that is, if you take a film like Joyland, which did get banned here, for me, that is the same thing. It is like this literary elite who goes and kind of preys on this marginalized community for their content, which is the transgender community. And of course, the West loves that. And so I kind of look at that with an eye of
two of my students
well.
are in this, in
Okay.
terms of the Jisne Banaibi and one of the people acting in it. But again, the thing is, why are we so afraid of that? In terms of, if we are saying that, that is somehow going to misrepresent Pakistan.
I don't think it would misrepresent Pakistan. I'm like, why is this film the film that,
but again,
the West wants to see?
Again, the thing is, that's not the first time. I mean, like, why were other quote-unquote controversial things which were accepted in the West? Because the West wants to believe certain things about, these
Exactly.
kind of, yeah. So the thing is, just like everyone else, you're selling certain things, and the thing is that they are the ones who are powerful, because you're living in not post-colonial but neo-colonial time period.
Yeah.
Then they, for the sake of simplicity, they are looking for a continuity, that so you have someone who's kind of a native informant.
Exactly.
That okay, so your name is Muhammad Aslam and you're educated wherever, but the thing is, you are still able to kind of talk about Pakistan, and you say, these are terrible things which are happening.
Yeah.
So I, as a Westerner, I'm extremely happy. Look, this is what I was saying all along, but this is not me saying, this is Muhammad Aslam saying this. So, but the thing is, why we were not going to change that. I mean, in terms of, as human beings, as societies, we try to look for projections of whatever narrative that we have about certain things. The issue is that rather than the state or someone else coming up with narratives which compete against that, why should you say that, let's ban it?
I agree with that.
Banning it doesn't.
Yeah, banning it doesn't
The
help,
reason Western knowledge, and again, of course, this is a huge generalization, but in terms of, if you read, Said's Orientalism, one of the things that he says that the reason a particular idea gets perpetuated over time is that the knowledge creation changes over time.
Okay.
So, US ki example, and again, I know that the word is offensive, but I mean, I'm using it as advisedly in terms of in the 20s and 30s, you could call people, these are niggers. But then it was felt that by like around 70s and 80s, that wasn't the right one. So you said, no, now we call them Negroes.
Yes.
Then you said, maybe that's not politically correct. Now you call them African Americans.
Yeah.
But it is
Blacks
always, always the people at the disadvantaged position whose names, whose association gets changed. We never change जो Caucasians हैं, जो whites हैं. So the people in position, they don't necessarily change. What happens is that new knowledges are created. But the thing is, knowledge is created not for this altruistic thing. Knowledge is political. Knowledge is subjective. Knowledge in terms of if I'm the one who's creating a particular knowledge, then that is going to be based on the experience and the ideology and whatever it is that I represent. So again, if one is saying that from here there are certain knowledges, you cannot, and again that's what the state is trying to do. It kind of feeds into the point that I was saying earlier on, which is that state is still not aware of the potential of these multiple narratives.
So the way I see the language thing is just a form of signaling, and it's a very elite form of signaling, which is like, no, you do not understand, you can't use that term anymore, this is the right term. And I remember seeing when I was on Twitter a tweet about how someone was protesting that you shouldn't call them transgenders, it's transgender persons. And when you're just like, okay, the constant policing of language just ends up, first of all, you kind of pigeonhole yourself into this echo chamber where certain groups can't enter because they've used the wrong language, and that makes them racist, that makes them bigoted, so they're out. And also you ensure that they're out of the room and that the room stays in between yourselves. Thing.
Again, that becomes kind of a slippery slope that, yes, as I said, that again, the changing of the terms is something which needs to be accepted. And of course, I mean, the reason why a particular term becomes offensive is that because you attach new meanings to it. Okay. So, Pakis कहना है. So the thing is, अगर उसको, if I appropriate it and I'm talking to friends and say, you Paki. So again, one way is that, maybe have I internalized this. The word in itself, there is nothing wrong with words. Okay, you go back and study of language in terms of the signified and the signifier in terms of what I say, and I say that a glass doesn't mean this. This is a completely arbitrary connection that we have. So words are what? Words are just mere sounds. It's the meaning that we associate with it. So earlier on, if you said, I don't know, nigger, it meant you're talking about someone who has particular features and particular complexion. The word in itself doesn't mean anything. Comrade, what does comrade mean? Comrade means a friend. But the thing is, if you called someone a comrade even now, then the thing is that, maybe you must be Marxist, you must be socialist, you must be fulana, ye. So again, these are things that which need to be understood. Unfortunately, more often than not, they are not. Which is one of the reasons, I mean, like again, Twitter or Facebook, or you don't think that, the place where they are created from, there are certain knowledges which are now created, which are directed against, for example, say US or UK, using these medias. Of course there are. But there, the narrative creation from the state is strong enough, is complex enough. It says, okay, fine, you have your freedom, and you can. There are certain things that you can say. Then, of course, it deems certain things.
And I think the way they do it is so much more insidious because it is so much more subtle.
Of course it is.
And yet we go so heavy-handed with our propaganda that you're just like, come on, like,
simple.
yeah.
That's the whole point. That's why I was saying that, the people who are in these stuffy positions and they say, no, this is the way it has to be. Okay, so the thing is that you can say in a particular setting, but as soon as you go out of that setting, your narrative appears like such simplistic, childish, and you cannot defend that. On the other hand, if there is a certain amount of complexity which is involved, then that narrative you are able. So again, that's the thing. So the desire is for the states to control, but it's how do you control things? Okay. So I mean, this is one of the things I tell my students that in a developing country, you have you used to have so much more freedom, in the sense that maybe if the state wanted to observe or keep you under investigation, they would assign a person or whatever, so you would have the person shadow you and this and that. But in the West, it is that you have the concentration of information that I just needed to type your social security number or your national insurance number, and I can find out, where your car is and where you got your petrol from, and, which hotel you use and which TV, just kind of at the click of a button. So what has happened post 9/11 is that the Western states have invested a lot of money in a developing country, and so now you have all those things which were there. So you have your smart card and you have your because what is it that it does is it brings the data in one place. So now the most kind of in the next 5 or 10 years, the most desirable field is data analysis. You have big data. And what is big data? Big data is in terms of your everyday communication, patterns, all that stuff. So the point is that rather than saying, no, we are not going to allow this, but because you can't prevent it.
Can't you?
No,
okay.
No, you can't prevent it.
I feel like we should all be offline. I feel like the internet was a terrible idea.
It might have been, but the thing is, it's a lifeline for many people.
Yeah, that's also true. Yeah.
So
I feel like it's like the panopticon, where you feel like you're being watched all the time. Eventually, you're not being watched, but you still act like you're being watched.
Of course it is. Of course it is. I mean, like again, that's the whole point. Control of information is the thing. Is that even the state ideology or the Western way of thinking is of individual freedom, but the thing is, certain laws are enacted using the security kind of paradigm to say, okay, not for the Americans who are here, but for Pakistanis, we can observe these things. But the thing is, eventually, then these things come back to the American
because I think especially post 9/11, when you had it with British Pakistanis and American Muslims generally, you had that concept of the native informant, which is that you had these informer Muslims who would go into these mosques, try and find out everything, and they would be told to do that by the FBI because the FBI would say, we have this on you, and it would be like some small kind of drugs charge that you were in possession.
And then, of course, and then the coercive means, MI6 use कर रहा था, FBI use कर रहा था. I'm sure यहाँ पे there will be people using that, but again they should not come as a surprise, because the thing is that the state uses coercive methodology because they are not able to come up with a counter narrative to the multiple narratives which exist.
What about, say, okay, Kashmir? I feel like Pakistan has a very strong narrative about Kashmir.
No, it's not.
And yet you have
that's just you saying. I mean, if it was such a strong narrative, how many people are supporting that?
No, as in, okay, we have
It's a terrible narrative.
A long-standing principal position. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah,
As
we
in,
have
we
a
know,
yeah.
and we have a very oppressive and brutal Indian army and its actions in Kashmir. And so you have stuff coming out like the Kashmir Files, and you have
Absolutely.
kind of we had a documentary, and it was about the Saffron Brigade, about India's descent into madness, essentially. So on that front, because you can see India doing this and work, like we were just talking before we came on, we were talking about Pathan. And I don't know if you read the plot or watched the movie. I mean, I would never watch the movie. You don't watch, but it was an insane narrative about how the ISI response to Article 370 being abrogated was to spread smallpox in India. Like, it was an insane narrative. And then you're like, this film has done like 300
India
crore.
didn't need like, smallpox. Again, the thing is, unfortunately, COVID ने वो चीजें वो कर दी थी because it was such a badly managed affair. And again, I mean, they have their own issues, but I think like again, the thing is, the state oppressive apparatus as far as again Kashmir is concerned, that is in place. That is in place. That should not be a surprise. But the issue is again somehow the narrative that has been built by Pakistan. It is I personally again the thing is again I feel that it could be more sophisticated if they want to get across to people, because just showing it on PTV, on having kind of these sad music playing and then stock files, I don't really know what it is that it does. Okay, so engage good PR firms, engage people who know about this communication, lobby. But on the other hand, India, because it is such a big economic market, all these, that's why again the knowledge that one is kind of saying, just for us, you say that okay, you can see that these are atrocities which are taking place, but the thing is, why? So it's not the knowledge that matters, it's the politics of that knowledge, because India is in terms of so much bigger in the economic size, so economic interests are tied in. Okay, the US is happy to talk about Afghanistan and this and that and all that stuff. It will not talk about
similarly with Israel, as in
So again, and which is kind of understandable that I mean Pakistanis, we are very reluctant to talk about China. Okay? So we are unhappy about the Muslims in Kashmir, but we're saying okay, fine.
But I feel like that's a little bit of a false equivalence. Do you not think? Because that's what Israel says as well.
It could be. I'm not, again, completely taken. But I'm just saying that again, even the position that everyone takes, the point is not for you to say that okay, fine, this is the way to win the argument. No. Issue is see why the other person is supporting that, and then try to, again, there is always a counter narrative for something. Whatever position that you have, if I want to bring out another narrative, then what are some of the things that I can how is it that I can further TikTok? I mean, like, get 2 or 3 good people who are TikTok specialists, employ them for Kashmir, maybe you will have a larger traction.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Okay, so again, the issue is these are battle of ideas. You can't just say that because I am the state and I am this institution and you have, it doesn't work like that. People would listen to you just because I'm not being critical, just because I'm not kind of responding back, doesn't necessarily mean that I agree with your message. So I think you need to constantly self-assess.
Okay.
Yeah. So again, otherwise, I mean, it's fantastic that Pakistan for so long that they've stuck with that state message.
Yeah.
But the thing is, what's the traction that you're able to get? Because the thing is, the other side is involved in this as well. They are involved on more fronts.
And they're much bigger power.
They are much bigger power. They have their economic leverage is much more. So all those things. So rather than kind of saying, oh, our narrative has been successful or failure, you need to see what is it that you are fighting against. A country that has, I don't know, 100 times your GDP and, in terms of population, in terms of the interaction that it has.
But it's interesting because I really feel like this soft power narrative in the States which are pushing it. I mean, you can see that with Korea. Never before would you have been able to think that you'd have teenage girls in Pakistan like singing Korean songs.
Pakistan.
Or like Turkey with Ertugrul.
As a huge fan of Ertugrul. And again, not no great glory of Islam, but as someone who loves the representation of family and the cultural norms. I mean, I was able to relate to it, for example, because my parents are from border villages with India. And I remember that, for example, when I would go to see my grandmother, and then, you know, she would kind of give her blessings, and, you know, she would say, oh, you know, may the journey go well, and maybe you come home, and all that stuff. So for me, just breaking of the bread, these are good or bad, but these are traditions that one is aware of. So for me, I mean, in that sense, I'm not looking for great glory of Islam, because this is a fictional, it is a real person, but I mean, the story is fictional.
But it's undeniable that that makes you feel good. In some
Of course,
way.
it makes you feel good. I mean, like as I said, like in class, having, you know, grown up watching Hollywood and Bollywood movies of, you know, Chuck Norris and Schwarzenegger and who else, you know, going and killing thousands and thousands of Muslims or natives or others. The funny thing is that you have like 3 or 4 people in Ertugrul, and, you know, we kind of joke around, and I tell students at least by the time, you know, you reach the end, they must have killed at least 7 or 8,000 non-Muslims. So it's just a kind of a payback in a way, you know, of course, whatever that might be. But again, the thing is soft power. If the state sponsored that, on the other hand, you know, you have ISPR, but that is so hard.
It's too on the nose. Yeah, it's so on the nose that you're not able to engage with it as like,
I mean, like,
something
okay,
cultural.
wasn't the US, for example, sponsoring the Air Force, sponsoring, you know,
Top Gun
and stuff. But the thing is, again, you have to have that distinction. But then again,
and apparently after the first Top Gun movie came out, 500% increase in recruitment to the Aviator Navy or something.
So again, and that's just one example. It works so closely. I mean, in the sense, look at you know, last 10 years of Hollywood, and, you know, who is the new emergent villain? Is going to be a Chinese person.
Yes.
Earlier on, it was the Muslim. So, but you know, you
it was
ask
the
them,
Russians, and then it was
it was Muslims,
then it was
now
Muslims,
it's
now
Chinese.
it's Chinese.
And but the thing is, you talk to them, they say, no, we are independent, of course, but it's rubbish.
And I found out that they change the films when they're being broadcast in China, so they record different scenes for them to be released in China, because they know
again,
that
what one is saying is that these are sophisticated processes. You cannot have one person, DG saab baithe mein hai, and he is going to tell, and it's always a he, middle-aged men, you know, mere wali age ke, who are so kind of caught up because they're so insecure in their own limited knowledge that they do not allow newer kind of, again, and it goes back to the point that I had made in the first instance, which is that the state is kind of in these stifled and stiff people who are in charge of the state narrative. They are not aware. By the time they catch up with the soft technology, again, I would bet with you, go and talk to the top people in culture or information ministry. They wouldn't know how to operate all the things which are outdated almost now. Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, all these things. So if they are not aware, then the thing is, someone who is working under me, he or she comes up, and then, I mean, I start to feel threatened. So again, it is this reluctance to embrace new knowledges because their own knowledge is not updated.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get that impression, especially when with all of these boomers, you're just like, are you guys still, you know, wanting to reply to emails with the fax machine? That's the impression you get. So how are you going to tell us what, under this new digital economy, what types of things we should use?
There is, ask them, like, what's cryptocurrency? They wouldn't have a clue. But
I mean, I don't have a clue, but I don't work in it, so yeah.
Again, that's what I'm saying, that for someone who belongs to my generation, Okay, and people in government, they'll be what? They'll be in their 50s. The thing is,
Yeah.
you ask them what are the new things which are happening, they wouldn't have a clue. And in the West, you have this idea of continuation of new knowledges. So there are these multiple positions. Okay, fine. You are sitting in. If you're talking about UK, Newcastle, mein baithe, there's someone at Cambridge, there's someone at Oxford, there is, other people. That channels of communication, of acknowledging almost this archaeology of knowledge that exists. So that the information, wherever it is created, it somehow gets funneled into one place where these things can be analyzed.
Yeah.
In our cases, that's really tough. So you need, if you want to become sophisticated, you need to develop mechanisms through which you can become sophisticated. Just saying कि actually हम सच्चे मुसलमान हैं and we are great Pakistanis and because I have studied abroad or because I have this important, those are silly terms
I agree.
That people use.
Yeah, and I definitely think I like that term, archaeology of
Yeah, that's not my term. I mean, that's again,
But I think
Foucault has used it or someone else has used it.
But I think there is a dire need to invest in this and to push that narrative and do
otherwise
it in a
you'll
strong
not
way.
catch up.
Yeah.
You'll always be kind of behind the proverbial eighth ball.
Yeah, I feel like we could carry on this discussion for a long time, but I know that you have to leave. So thank you so much for joining us here today. I hope everyone at home also found this interesting. And join us for another podcast about war next time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity.
Thanks, this was really great. Thank you.